that looked ready to fall apart. The woman's eyes met his as he passed. Wide, dark, and tired, but she did not flinch. She just held her chin high and shifted the child on her hip. Fletcher rode on, but something pulled at him. 5 strides past her, he stopped his horse. He looked back. She was still watching him. He turned around. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat as he drew near, "you look like you could use a hand." Her lips trembled for a second, but she steadied them. "I am not looking for charity." "I did not offer any," he said simply. The boy, maybe 7, stepped in front of her. "We do not need help," he said, trying to look fierce. "We are just waiting for Mama's brother." The girl, younger, stared up at Fletcher with a hopeful face. "Mama said Uncle Simon might not come." Fletcher's eyes flicked back to the woman. "Is that true?" She hesitated. "Yes, he is in Helena. Might not make it before the snow locks the pass." "You planning to winter out here?" he asked, glancing at the broken windows. She straightened. "We do not have a place here, but I have a job waiting at the boarding house in town. I just need to settle a debt first to get the key." "How much?" She blinked. "Excuse me, how much is the debt?" he asked again. She looked away. $53, he whistled low. "That is more than a boarding house job pays in a season." "It was my husband's," she said, her voice low. "Before he passed, he borrowed against the wagon and horses. Mr. Creighton says I cannot stay in town until it is cleared." Fletcher glanced at the children. "And your name?" "Vera Jennings," she said. "This is Samuel and Susanna." Fletcher dismounted. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small coin pouch. Vera stepped back. "I said I do not want charity." "Good," he said, "because I am not offering it." He handed her the pouch. "Call it a trade." "For what?" she asked, her hands closed tightly at her sides. He smiled just a little. "For your heart." Vera stared at him. Fletcher shrugged. "You pay the debt, get that job, I will be on my way tomorrow, but if someday you find you might miss me, well, then you will know it was a fair deal." "You are mad," she whispered. "Probably," he said. She held the pouch in her hand, weighed it. Then she looked up. "Why would you do this?" "Because I know what it is to be stuck," he said. "And I know what it is to have no one come." Vera looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked into the mercantile. When she came back out, the pouch was lighter. She held a key in her hand. Her eyes were wet. "We have a room," she said. "Upstairs above the kitchen. It is warm." Fletcher nodded. "Good, you can come by," she added, voice soft. "If you want supper." He tipped his hat. "I would like that." The boarding house smelled of stew and wood smoke. Vera moved through the kitchen with sleeves rolled high, her hands red from scrubbing. Fletcher sat at the table, Samuel and Susanna beside him, both eating like they had not seen food in days. "You are staying in town?" Vera asked, pausing to ladle more soup into his bowl. "For a bit," Fletcher said. "I took a job hauling freight from Missoula. Pays decent." She gave him a quick look. "So you are not just passing through?" "Not anymore." Vera's hands tightened around the ladle. Fletcher reached out and gently took it from her. Her fingers brushed his cold and slender. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "I know." "But I meant what I said." She looked down. "I barely know you." "You will," he said, "if you let me." Weeks passed. Snow came heavy and stayed. Fletcher stayed too. He carved wooden animals for Susanna, taught Samuel how to hold a rifle properly, and fixed the broken axle on Vera's wagon without a word. At night, he sat by the fire with her after the children slept. They did not talk much, just sat close. Sometimes she would fall asleep, her head on his shoulder. One evening, she brought him a cup of coffee and sat beside him on the porch. "My husband's name was Lewis," she said. "He died last spring, fever." Fletcher nodded. "I figured. He was a good man, but we had nothing. He took out that loan thinking he could start something here. Then he got sick, and everything fell apart." "You held it together," he said. She turned to him. "I was angry at first, at him, at the world. But the day you showed up, I had 30 cents and 2 hungry children. You did not ask questions, you just helped." "I saw you," Fletcher said. "Standing there, you looked like someone worth helping." Vera looked away, eyes full. He touched her hand. "I am not going anywhere, Vera, not unless you send me." She looked back at him then. "I do not want to send you." He leaned in, slow and careful. She met him halfway. The kiss was soft, real, like something found after a long winter. "Will you marry me?" Fletcher asked. Weeks later, snow melting off the rooftops, Vera looked up from the bread she was kneading. "You are serious?" "I never asked anyone before." She wiped her hands on her apron. "And what do you want in return?" He stepped forward and cupped her face. "Just your heart," she smiled. "You already have it." He kissed her again, and this time the children burst in from the yard, laughing and throwing snow. They laughed too, and outside the sun rose higher over Marrow Creek. The worst had passed, and love had stayed. By the time the river thawed, and the last of the ice cracked loose from the banks, the rhythm of their life had settled into something quiet and steady. Vera's mornings began before the sun, flour dusting her sleeves as she baked loaves for the boarders, the children still curled under quilts upstairs. Fletcher rose early too, not for drifting anymore, but to haul freight between Marrow Creek and the nearby logging camps, the wagon mended by his own hands. One evening, after supper dishes had been stacked and the boarders' boots thudded overhead, Vera stepped outside to find Fletcher mending the fence rail behind the house. The lantern beside him cast an amber glow, the sawdust catching in his hair where it curled behind his ears. She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching him work. "You always fix things when no one asks," she said. Fletcher didn't look up. "We don't wait for permission to rot." She walked out barefoot onto the packed dirt, the spring air warming her skin. "You could rest, you know. Nobody's keeping tally." He set the hammer down, wiped his palms on his trousers. "I rest when there's nothing left to build." Vera sat on the rail beside him. "You ever think about building something for yourself?" He hesitated, gaze dropping to the ground. "Never stayed long enough anywhere to try." She reached for his hand, calloused and strong. "You're here now." He turned to her, the lantern catching the lines around his eyes. "I think about a piece of land, south of the ridge near the cottonwoods. There's a spring that runs year-round. Flat ground, good for a house." She didn't answer right away. "Then you want to farm?" "No," he said. "I want a place to come back to, something that's mine." She traced the back of his hand with her thumb. "Ours." That word hung between them. Not a question this time, just a truth settling into place. Later that week, Vera brought home a folded map from the post office, creased and smudged. She spread it over the kitchen table while Susanna napped and Samuel shaped kindling by the hearth. Fletcher stepped in, snowmelt dripping from his boots. "What's this?" "Land parcels," she said. "I asked the clerk. That spring you mentioned, he says the claim's still open." He stepped closer, scanning the markings. "You want to file it?" "I think we should," she said. "Before someone else does." He looked up, something steady in his eyes. "You're sure?" "I want roots," she said. "Not just for me, for them." Samuel looked up from his carving. "Are we moving?" Fletcher knelt beside him. "Only if your mama says yes." Vera folded the map. "We'll go look tomorrow." The ground was soft with melt when they hitched the team and rode out. Susanna sat between them, wrapped in Fletcher's coat, her head on his chest as the wagon bumped over thawing ruts. Samuel rode behind on the pony Fletcher had traded for 2 cords of firewood and a barrel of lard. They reached the clearing by midday. The spring gurgled in a crooked line through tall grass, cottonwoods just beginning to bud. Fletcher jumped down first, lifted Susanna, then offered Vera his hand. She stepped down and turned a circle, wind tugging her skirt. "It's beautiful." "Flat enough for a house here," Fletcher said. "Barn could go there." He pointed toward a rise. "You could grow beans and squash in that bend." Samuel ran to the water's edge, skipping stones. Susanna trailed behind him, her laughter echoing. Fletcher leaned beside Vera. "You see it too, don't you?" She nodded, eyes bright. "I see everything." That night, back in town, Vera wrote the clerk's name on the corner of an envelope. In the morning, Fletcher would ride to file the claim. As she sealed the envelope, she looked over at him sitting at the table, sanding a latch for the new pantry door. "You never told me where you were headed before you found us," she said. He looked up, pausing. "Didn't have a destination, just a direction." She tilted her head. "And now," he smiled, faint but sure. "Now I have a place." She walked over, leaned down, and kissed his temple. "You have a home." He reached for her hand again, held it tight while the oil lamp flickered low. The outside world might still hold storms and debts and hard winters, but inside their small kitchen, the future had begun to root itself quiet, firm, and lasting. By late April, the ground had firmed enough for Fletcher to begin breaking soil, and Vera had taken to keeping a ledger of seeds and timbers, careful to stretch every dollar from her boarding house wages. They made decisions quietly, over supper or while folding laundry, each word shaped by the weight of shared labor. The land claim had gone through without a hitch, and a corner of the kitchen now held a rough sketch of their future home drawn by Samuel, who added a smokehouse and 2 goats with sprawling horns. One afternoon, as the shadows stretched long and the scent of pine rose damp from the thawed earth, Vera stepped into the small storeroom behind the kitchen and found Fletcher bent over a crate, sorting nails by size. "I saw Mr. Greeley on my way back from the butcher," she said. "He heard we're building. Offered to sell us his old root cellar stones." Fletcher straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "That man's been sitting on those for 3 years. He said he'd be willing to trade for labor. His daughter's due soon." "Wants a new floor put in before the baby comes." Fletcher set the cloth down. "I'll ride over at first light." Vera leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You don't have to say yes to everything." He looked up at her. "I don't say yes to everything. Just the things that matter." She didn't reply right away. Then, quietly, "It's not just work, is it?" "No," he said. "It's building something that'll last longer than me." She stepped closer, tracing the edge of the crate with her fingers. "I never thought I'd be part of something like that." "You are," he said. "You're the beginning of it." A beat passed. Fletcher reached into the crate, pulled out a short iron hinge. "I've been thinking about the door." "The house door," he nodded. "It should open inward. I want it to feel like it's welcoming you in, not holding the world out." Vera watched him for a long moment, then reached out and took the hinge from his hand, turning it over carefully. "Let's build that." The next week, they moved tools and supplies to the clearing just past the cottonwoods. Fletcher rigged a lean-to for shelter, and Vera brought bread and smoked meat wrapped in cloth, setting out lunch for the children beneath a sycamore. Susanna picked wild violets from the edge of the spring, weaving them into a small crown that she gently set on her mother's head. Fletcher caught the moment from the porch beams he was framing, and his hammer paused mid-stroke. "You look like a queen," he called. Vera smiled at him, lowering herself into the grass beside her daughter. "Then you'd best build me a castle, Mr. Price." "I'm trying," he said. "But my kingdom's got splinters." "Then I'll fetch the salve," she replied. That night, Fletcher sat on the back stoop of the boarding house, oiling the handles of his tools. Vera came out with 2 mugs of chicory coffee, her sleeves rolled past her elbows, a scrape on her arm from hauling lumber. "I got a letter from my cousin today," she said, sitting beside him. "She's in Bozeman now, works at a millinery shop." He looked at her, curious. "Is she close to you?" "We were once," Vera said. "She asked if I'd ever come back east. Said she could get me a place in the shop." Fletcher didn't speak. Vera took a breath. "I told her no." He turned toward her fully now. "I told her," she continued, "that I have a house to build. And someone waiting for me when I get home." The wind moved through the cottonwoods in the distance, a soft hush like distant water. Fletcher reached for her hand, slow and sure, and she let him take it. "You're not just waiting," he said. "You're the reason I'm building it at all." They sat there until the light thinned and the coffee cooled, and Vera leaned her head against his shoulder not in weariness, but in belonging. Later, when they rose and stepped back inside, the door creaked on a hinge Fletcher had carved himself, and it swung inward just the way he'd planned. By early May, the frame of the house stood upright against the soft sky, its bones clean and square. Fletcher had finished the joists by hand, notching each one with care, and Vera had begun stitching curtains in the evenings, her needle moving steady as the firelight flickered low. The children had taken to gathering pebbles and bits of colored glass, to line the path they planned to lay from the door to the spring. One morning, while Vera stripped linens from the boarding house beds, Mrs. Eberly, the innkeeper's wife, leaned against the doorway with a ledger tucked under her arm. "You'll be leaving soon," she said, not unkindly. Vera folded a pillowcase, smoothing the creases. "Once the roof's on." Mrs. Eberly watched her for a moment. "You've done good work here." "I'll miss your bread." Vera's lips curved slightly. "You'll manage, you always do." The older woman nodded, then added, "You sure about this, Vera? A house out by the river, that man." Vera didn't stop folding. "I've never been more certain of anything, Mrs. Eberly hesitated, then turned back toward the stairs. "Then I hope it gives you peace." That evening, after supper, Vera walked the long road out to the homestead alone. The wagon had thrown a wheel earlier in the week, and the children were with Mrs. Eberly's niece, who had taken a shine to them both. Fletcher was already out at the land, working by lantern light. The sun was just starting to sink, low and orange, when she reached the clearing. She found him on the roof, hammering the last of the shingles into place. His shirt sleeves were rolled high and sawdust clung to his arms. "Fletcher," she called, shading her eyes. He turned, then climbed down the ladder with a practiced ease. "You walked all the way out here?" he asked, brushing his hands on his trousers. "I needed to see it," she said. "Like this." He stepped beside her, following her gaze. The house stood in silhouette, the porch beam casting a long shadow toward the cottonwoods. The door frame was hung, no door yet, just the open space where it would be. "You'll want to hang the door before the rains come," she said. "I was waiting," he said. "Thought maybe you'd want to help." She looked up at him. "You want me to help build the door to my own house?" "No," he said. "I want us to build the door to our house." She said nothing for a long moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. "Samuel's been drawing again. He says we should paint it blue." Fletcher chuckled low in his throat. "We don't have paint." "I know," she said, "but we could find a way." Later, he took the drawing from her, held it between them. "He's thinking ahead. He's following your example." Fletcher folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Do you ever regret it, letting me help that day?" "No," she said. "I regret not trusting you sooner." They stood there as the sky deepened, the wind carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Vera reached down and loosened her boots, stepping barefoot into the grass. "I want to be married before we move in," she said. He looked at her, serious now. "Then we'll speak to Reverend Harmon tomorrow." "I don't want anything grand," she added. "Just the children and maybe a little bread and honey after. That sounds like the right kind of day." She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his shoulder. "There's still so much ahead." "There is," he said, "but we're not facing it alone." She stayed curled into him, the warmth of his body steady against the cooling air. He didn't speak again, just held her there as the stars began to prick through the darkness one by one, like lanterns lit slowly across a velvet sky. The wedding took place on a soft Sunday morning beneath the cottonwood trees, the air just cool enough to carry the scent of sun-warmed grass. Reverend Harmon stood with his boots planted firm in the earth, a leather Bible in his hands. Vera wore a dress she'd let down at the hem, one she hadn't touched in years, and a ribbon that Susanna had picked from the mercantile bin. Fletcher wore the only shirt he hadn't worked in. Samuel and Susanna stood close, each gripping one of Vera's hands until the moment came. When the Reverend asked if she would take Fletcher as her husband, Vera's voice didn't waver. And when Fletcher answered, he didn't take his eyes off her for a second. Afterward, they shared a loaf of oat bread Vera had baked that morning, still warm in its cloth wrap, and a jar of honey passed around until sticky fingers and laughter settled into the spaces between words. "You didn't tell me the roof creaks already," Vera said later, walking hand in hand with Fletcher up the porch steps of the new house. "Only when it's warm," he replied. "Means the place is breathing." She paused in the doorway, looking at the plain pine boards, the spaces still waiting for shelves and hooks. "We'll fill it slow." "That's how the best things grow," he said. Inside, they found the children had arranged pebbles in the hearth in the shape of a heart. Vera bent to trace it with her fingers, then turned as Fletcher began to unfold a canvas roll on the table. "What's that?" "Ledger of work," he said. "I kept track every board every hour." She stepped closer, running a finger down the neat columns. "Why? I never wanted to forget what we built, or how." Vera leaned her forehead against his arm. "We've both come far." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "And we're not done yet." That evening, the four of them sat cross-legged on the floor, passing around a bowl of berries and cream they had bartered for with a neighbor. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the bare floorboards. Susanna fell asleep curled against Vera's side, and Samuel leaned into Fletcher's shoulder without a word. "You ever think," Vera said softly, "about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day?" "I try not to," he said. "Because I did stop." She looked at him, eyes full of quiet certainty. "I'm glad you did." As dusk settled, Vera carried Susanna to the cot they'd set up in the back room, Samuel trailing sleepily behind. When she returned, Fletcher was sitting by the fire with a small knife and a cedar plank. She watched him make a few careful cuts, then looked over his shoulder. He had carved a name into the wood, the Jennings place. "You didn't put Price," she said. He set the knife down. "It's your name. The name the children carry. This house is theirs too." She lowered herself beside him, touched the fresh carving. "You're one of us now, you always were." The next morning they rose early. Fletcher hitched the team to haul timbers for a neighbor's roof, and Vera walked with the children to town to pick up a package from the post. They returned by noon with 2 metal pots and a letter from Vera's cousin, tucked away unopened for now. Weeks turned to months. The porch gained a swing built from old wagon boards. The garden Vera planted in the bend of the creek came in strong beans first, then squash, then a few tomatoes that stretched toward the sun like they'd never known hardship. Samuel took to carving birds from leftover wood, and Susanna named each one, lining them along the windowsill. On the first snowfall of the next winter, Fletcher came in from the cold with a bundle wrapped in burlap. He laid it on the table and unwrapped it slowly. Vera stared at the blue paint tin. "You found some." "Traded a cord of pine for it," he said. "Thought it was time." She looked at the door, then back at him. "Let's do it together." So they did, brushing the new color onto the wood in long, even strokes.